Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. And this week we get a bit feisty because we debate on the services that we believe you should pay for, but where it gets really interesting is where we debate on what's not worth paying for. It's a great episode.
Yes, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. If you don't know, we've got a company called Property Hub Invest that bought over £100 million worth of property last year for our clients. You can find out more about that at propertyhub.net/invest. But before we debate what is and isn't worth paying for, let's get into the news this week. Two stories this week. The first one, Rob, if you remember back to the start of the year, the narrative was very much house prices falling this year by somewhere around 4%. That seemed to be the consensus. That narrative might be falling apart.
Well, Rob, when you read headlines like the house price charts that show why now is the time to buy property in the Telegraph, you could be forgiven for thinking, things have changed. I can't remember seeing a headline in a major paper so positive on property for a few years now. I don't know if that's a good thing, which we'll come to, but let's look at what's being said. So there's a load of charts showing that property prices have started to stabilise or even started to grow now, depending on what index you look at. But what's most interesting is that people have started to change their tune. So in this article, it talks about different experts who are now saying that property prices in the UK should rise in 2024, which you could say, well, fair enough. That's what we've been saying on the podcast, so why can't others say it? Well, those same experts actually predicted falls this year, not that long ago either. Remember, we are only in April, and a few months ago, Savills said that property prices would fall by 3% this year. Now, in this article, they haven't put their new number in, because that would be a little unfair, revising it just a few months in. But they are now saying the market will end flat or increase slightly by the end of the year, which is a change. But they're not alone. Other experts in this article have even been punchier, suggesting growth of 5% this year. So surely this is a good thing that people are now more optimistic. Well, Rob, as I've alluded to, I don't know if this is a good thing. If it's just a little bit of noise, then I think it is a good thing. I think it's nice to have some confidence and reassurance that everyone is on the same page and seeing property prices doing well. But if this is the start of a trend where there's lots of coverage for property, across the board are predicting property prices to go up this year and beyond, I'm not so sure that is a good thing. This middle market is actually a great place to operate because you can do deals, but property prices aren't falling. When everyone starts to believe property prices are going to kick on, there's going to be a lot of growth, that's a tough market to operate in. Yes, we get capital growth, but it's harder to do deals.
Exactly. We could frankly do without having a boom right now. But to add even more confusion into the mix, at exactly the same time as articles like this are starting to appear, the house price indices from Nationwide and Halifax have turned slightly negative. So after 4 or 5 months of prices going up in those indices, which people were not expected, just as they start to come down a tad, we see positive stories like this one. So it's all very confused, and it will be very interesting to see what those house price indices show next month, which of course we'll be getting into in our market update in a couple of weeks' time. But there's another news story that caught my eye this week, Rob, which is that the Bank of England has called in help. The Bank of England not had the best couple of years, completely failed to see the spike in inflation coming, are generally considered to be behind the curve on everything. They need some help. Who did they call in to give them that help? The guy who failed to see the financial crisis coming. They invited in Ben Bernanke, formerly of the US Federal Reserve, to basically tell them where they went wrong. And there's an article in City AM that breaks down the report that Ben Bernanke gave. And it says he did not hold back. The quote is, "The kicking is a severe one." And basically the main problem, as far as I can understand it, not an expert in this stuff, seems to be that the Bank of England had a model, and an assumption of the model was that inflation always falls back to 2%. So if you look at any of the graphs that they put out over the last few years, by the end of the time period of that graph, inflation has always come back down to 2%, which seems crazy, but it's literally an embedded assumption of the model. So when you assume that that's the result, of course, it's going to be thrown by events that make it unlikely to happen. To me, as a complete outsider, seems not that helpful. And to Ben Bernanke, as an insider, seemingly not that helpful either. So off the back of this, Rob, apparently the Bank of England are accepting his recommendations. They're going off to work on their models, get their act together. So maybe we'll be seeing a new and improved Bank of England with spot-on figures very soon.
It's possible, Rob, but I've just checked the timeline of Ben Bernanke's track record on the 2008 crisis. And people may think you were a little harsh saying that he didn't see 2008 coming, because who did? But he did have an important role of running pretty much the world's economy because, let's face it, the US economy, with the dollar being the world's reserve currency, you'd like to think he was reasonably well informed. But in February of 2008, the same month that Northern Rock was privatised by the UK government, Ben Bernanke said he sees no recession. No recession. And I'd say he got that one wrong. It wasn't exactly years out either. It was when banks were being privatised. So I don't know, should they be listening to all of his recommendations? I'm sure he's got a lot of experience now off the back of 2008, and maybe we're being overly harsh. But it's interesting who they've picked to give them this advice.
Yeah, I've just checked the almighty Wikipedia. Apparently the US recession had already started at the point that he said no recession. It turned out to have started 2 months earlier. So not the best call.
Yeah, so it's pretty bad when you can't predict the immediate future, but it's probably even worse when you can't actually get the current state of affairs correct. So an interesting choice to get a kicking from the Bank of England, but the fact that they've chosen him probably tells us everything that we need to know.
Right, so in property, there are lots of things that you can pay for, but should you be paying for them? That's what we are going to be trying to get to the bottom of. So we've got 3 metaphorical buckets in front of us. We've got worth paying for, not paying for, and it depends. And we're going to go through around 10 different things that you could be paying for as a property investor and answer the question, should you?
You know what, Rob? I'll bet in this list, things that people should absolutely be doing and they're not. So I think there's going to be some action points for everybody listening today when we go through this list.
Okay, let's start with what I think is going to be an easy one that we're going to agree on, and that is a mortgage broker. So someone who's going to understand what you want, go out to the market, find you the best deal, and see that process through on your behalf, probably taking a fee from you in the process.
It is the easiest yes of the day, and it's probably the one that everyone expected us to say, and rightly so. You are bonkers if you're not using a mortgage broker. We, with all of our experience, with all the advice that we pass on, with all of our insights, still use a mortgage broker. And a mortgage broker who's an expert with buy-to-let. That's the key point. Not a general mortgage broker, an expert with buy-to-let. Do it. Once you've used a mortgage broker, you will not stop using a mortgage broker. Rob, I think we've talked about this one enough over the years that we don't need to go in any further. So mortgage broker, it's a banker, it's an obvious one, you should do it. One I'm not so sure on is surveys. When you purchase a home, you take out a survey. Well, most people do. And you get the survey, you get a report, and it gives you information on the property. Now, the level of detail depends on the survey you go for. So you can just get a valuation survey, which just pretty much does as it says. It gives you the valuation. You can get a home buyer's survey, which is a detailed survey. It's actually quite a lot of information there, and it will look at the condition of the property. But you can take it one step further and get a full structural survey, which goes into a masses of detail. It's pages and pages of report. There's a lot of information in there. The final two, I hardly ever do. The final two, the home buyers and the full structural. Most of the time, I will just do the valuation survey. And that's because I have to. Because when I take out a mortgage, they insist on a valuation, which is fair enough. They're lending me a fair few quid. So I will do it. But if I'm buying cash, which I have done previously, I wouldn't take any survey out at all in most circumstances. There are exceptions, and I would take out surveys on certain types of property. But for me, Rob, if I'm buying cash, I'm not doing one at all. And if I'm doing a mortgage, I'm doing the minimum standard on most properties.
So that sounds like it's edging into it depends, and I would agree with that. So obviously with the mortgage, always get a valuation survey anyway. But I think I've only gone above that twice. I'm pretty sure that's right. So once it was on a property that I was flipping, so I really wanted to know what I'm getting into is the amount of work what I think it is. And even then, if I was super experienced, if I was a builder, if I did this all the time, maybe I wouldn't have done, but that wasn't the case. The other time was on a terraced house, which was older, and I just wanted some reassurance. I didn't know what was lurking there. But because mostly I'll either buy flats or I'll buy something pretty new, it's just not worth it to me anyway. Because, well, if it's under 10 years old, then the big stuff is protected by guarantee anyway. And if it's a flat, then things like the roof and the communal heating system, if there is one, stuff that you really care about, they normally can't get access to and so won't tell you anything about. So it depends on the situation. It also depends a bit on whether you want some reassurance, I suppose. You could say that a few £100 to just put your mind at rest for a very big purchase is worth it, but it's not something that, by the sounds of it, either of us do very much.
So surveys is going in a depends category. Rob, I want to bring up one that may now go down as not worth paying for, but previously you've had it in the worth paying for camp. And I was surprised when you told me your change of stance on this. So I'm sure our podcast listeners will be as well. And that is insurance, and specifically landlord insurance, because you've previously said on the podcast you take it out. You told me the other week you no longer do it. And I think everyone needs to be updated.
So insurance can mean lots of different things, right? So if you've got a mortgage, you'll always need to have buildings insurance, always. If you've got a flat, then that will be taken care of as part of your service charge in almost every case. But if it's a house, you'll need to get it yourself. And even if you don't have a mortgage, you'd be insane not to. So we'll always do that. It's the things you can add on top of that I've stopped doing. So contents insurance is an example of that. It's something that I used to pay for. This is always for landlords' contents, by the way. Tenants' contents always has to be covered separately by them. But I just realised after a while that I'd never claimed on it, and it would be cheaper to just not pay the premiums and pay out of pocket for anything if I ever needed to. Another component of insurance that I used to use is rent guarantee insurance, which in theory is fantastic because your rent is the income stream that pays for your mortgage and everything else. If you can guarantee that, even if a tenant stops paying, surely that is worth it. And for me, it used to be. But then as a result of COVID, which was frankly a giant shock to insurers because loads of people stopped paying, they were allowed to stop paying, and it was all just a total mess. All the insurance policies became a lot more expensive and a lot less attractive in terms of how long they took to kick in, what they wouldn't cover, all that kind of thing. So for me, it got to a point where it wasn't worth it. So across the board now, on insurance, I basically do the bare minimum. Rob, I'll be curious to know if you differ on this, but for me, insurance is something that covers the worst case, the thing that you really don't want to happen, the thing that you couldn't afford to happen. And if you're at a point where you've got some reasonable cash reserves and so you can pay for things out of pocket, I take the view that I'd rather do that and just not be paying out for the insurance.
And that has pretty much always been my stance, Rob. So I'm very pleased to hear you've acknowledged I've been right and you've joined me.
I don't remember saying exactly that, but
that's how I interpreted it, Rob, and I hope everyone else listening has as well. I do actually have a few exceptions to the rule. I think your point of having, if you've got cash reserves, then having insurance, is it worth it? I think it's a good one. That is the stance I take. I'm in the fortunate position that if something goes wrong, I can fix it. I did have an insurance policy on an older property that I used to have, I no longer have. And it was useful because things used to go wrong in that property all the time, and it covered the boiler. It was more of a boiler and appliances insurance, and that actually paid for itself many times over. But other than that, I've not really taken out insurance ever. But that is because I've been in the fortunate position to just get it fixed when needed. Things like washing machines and washer dryers do break down, but they're so cheap now. If they're not integrated, they're so cheap if they're freestanding to replace. And I know it's terrible, we're a throwaway society and it possibly could be fixed. But the call-out charges to fix those things are nearly as much as a new machine. So I just take the view that I'll just replace it. Get one delivered the next day. Others won't be as gung-ho as us, Rob. But I think it's interesting to share why we have this point of view. And maybe a few people listening are changing their mind.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing, which is why I think this always is going to end up in the it depends pile. Let's move on to another one, which for me is a very, very easy worth it, but which perhaps isn't something you'd expect to see in this category, which is photos. Quality listing photos for your property. So if you're using a letting agent and they're any good, then they should be taking their own photos and those photos should be good. But if you're letting yourself, or if you're flipping a property, or if you've got a holiday let and you want to make it look really fantastic, or even if you are going to be using a letting agent, but you've got a property, maybe it's furnished, maybe you've just got it ready for the first time, and you want to get some fantastic photos that you can use for several future relets, then professional photos, for me, Rob, is an easy yes. Because when people are looking at the sales or the rental listings, you've got a fraction of a second to try and catch their attention and to get the click and get their attention. And photos are the way to do that.
Rob, this is such an easy yes, but it amazes me it's not an easy yes for everyone. You only have to go on Rightmove to see it's not the case. But that's why it's an easy yes, because you'll immediately stand out from the competition. People aren't going to be bothered going round property to property. If it looks rubbish on the photos, they'll just discount it unless it's really, really cheap. So It's a no-brainer, but yet so many people just don't do it. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So good photos is definitely going in the worth paying for pile. Let's get controversial, Rob. Let's mix it up now and let's put something in the bucket that I believe is not worth paying for. And I'm hoping you're going to come along with me on this one, which is mentoring / courses. So many people offer these services. You go to a property networking meetup and you'll have people trying to pitch you one-on-one, this type of thing, mentoring and courses. And normally the person talking at the front will be doing the same as well. It's not worth it. We've talked on the podcast a number of times how you can get informal mentors. It's really easy to do. There are so many great people in the property industry who will help you for free. You don't need someone to handhold you 24/7. It's probably the case that you just need the odd thing answering. You've got Ask Rob and Rob as well in our Sunday Times column, so we can help you that way, and we'll put out loads of stuff on the podcast. But that's the point. There's loads of free information out there, and there's loads of helpful people out there who will give you advice for free, because if you are an expert in something, people like to share that knowledge. And not many people get asked about property, because you listen to the podcast and you think, oh, well, property is everything. But most people are not as nuts as you. Most people don't obsess over these things. So when an expert gets asked about property, they love to share in the majority of cases. So mentoring, a big no. And courses, Rob, there are no secrets. It's not like we've held something back from the podcast after 10 years and we leave that to the people who give courses. That information is out there for free. All the information you need to become a property investor is free to access. So, Rob, after my passionate plea, I'm hoping you join me on the stance of not worth paying for mentoring and courses.
Well, partially just to be difficult, I'm going to add a layer of nuance to this, which is that I could imagine certain situations where it could be worth it. But those situations are always for someone who's already started and made some progress in property.
Right, Rob, you're going to have to give me an example. You can't be vague. After all that passion I've just put into it, you've got to give me real examples.
Okay, so let's say that you are pursuing a buy, refurbish, refinance strategy. And you've done one or two, they went okay, it's enough to validate the model, but you made a load of mistakes, learned some lessons, and critically, you've got enough cash to go on and do this at some reasonable degree of scale. You don't want to make all the same mistakes again, you want to go faster, so you find someone who's done exactly this thing before. Ideally, you don't find them because they've just served you a Facebook ad. You go and seek them out for their expertise. Then they support you one-on-one to execute your plans for the next year, allowing you to scale up faster, avoid mistakes, and so on and so on. I think in that situation, you can make an argument that it's worth paying for, but that is not the majority of cases. I would draw a very hard line and completely agree with you if you haven't got started in property yet. So many people go, I want to invest in property, I need to find a mentor or need to go on a course. For me, that's never the answer. The answer is to use all the free resources out there to learn what you need to learn and then go out and do it and start learning your lessons. So I think there are some situations, Rob, but for clarity and to make super clear that this is not something I think is necessary when you're starting out, I think we should put it in the not worth paying for pile.
Phew. I thought we were going to have a falling out there. All right, we're good. We're still in a good place, Rob, after all these years. Okay, let's see if we're in a good place after discussing the next one. And the next one is credit checks. And I believe that you should not pay for credit checks because there are services out there now, like ClearScore, that will allow you to access your credit score and your report for free. So why would you pay for it? There are paid services out there, but when you can access it for free, why would you do otherwise? So it's a nice, easy one, right?
Well, maybe this is where the falling out comes. I think it's a bit more complex than that because there are three major credit referencing agencies in the UK. ClearScore only reports data from one of them. And lenders, which is what you care about here, they all use different ones. And you can't really pick your lender on the basis of which agency they use. I think you're right, though, that in the vast majority of cases, it's pretty much always going to be the same. So if you lived at the same address for years and you know that you always pay your bills, you pay by direct debit and it's just not an issue, then there's going to be nothing in particular to worry about. But there are edge cases, and I am one of those edge cases. Because of my love for renting my home, which I've spoken about multiple times, I've moved more than the average person. And as a result, trying to keep my address up to date with different lenders and banks and all the rest of it is an absolute nightmare. And I have been declined for mortgages before because, for example, Equifax has everything completely up to date, but Experian, even though they've been given the same information, haven't. They've just failed to do it. So I actually pay for Check My File, which is a service that integrates the three, because it's an easy way of keeping updated every month when it updates. You can go to Experian and Equifax individually and pay their monthly fee. I don't know why you would, because it comes out to more. But both of them also, as well as their subscription, they must by law provide you with what's called a statutory credit report, which is a one-off snapshot rather than a subscription that you can get for free. So I think, Rob, as your ability to get credit, get mortgages is so important as an investor, this is an it depends. And the depends is on how simple and straightforward your financial life is.
This may shock you, Rob, but I'm not as passionate about credit scoring. So if you want to put it in depends, I'm happy to. I think for most people, it's not needed, but you are an edge case, and maybe there's other people like you. I hope not, but there might be. So if that's the case, then for diplomacy, I'll put it in depends as well. Okay, we'll go with it.
I feel like we're in a slightly rocky place, so let's try and bring it back round with an easy one. Having an accountant. It's been brought to my attention that some people attempt to do their own accounts. These people are insane. Why would you do that? An accountant is worth paying for. Let's move on, unless you want to argue.
No, Rob, I think it's crazy. I wouldn't even contemplate doing my own accounts. It's just not worth the time or the effort. Unless you are a qualified accountant, and fair enough, maybe that's the edge case. But I think we can safely put this into the worth paying for category, and there are no arguments or debates, at least from me. If you listening have a different point of view, then please reach out and let us know. But we are absolutely going to carry on paying for our accountants. Rob, I'm feeling mischievous today because I'm going to mix things up again. And I know you've previously delivered a lot of great content on why you should use an assistant for your property portfolio. And you know what? It is great content, and I think the stuff you've shared there is brilliant. But I believe that if you've got one or two properties, you probably should do it yourself for two reasons. One, it's not a lot of work to do the mortgages and all the admin for one or two properties. But the second reason is that you learn how to do it. So in case you ever have to do it again in the future, you know how to process it all. And by knowing how to process it all, you can then pass it on to an assistant. So I'm trying to get this in the depends camp. I know you probably would have started in the worth paying for camp on assistants, but will you move?
Well, as you would know if you'd attended the wonderful presentation I gave for our Property Hub Select members, an assistant is about far more than just that. So what I have is someone who is the first point of contact for my entire portfolio. So everything is filtered through her. 90% of stuff gets sorted without me even knowing about it. And then for anything where it does need an opinion from me, she'll just send me a WhatsApp messages and I'll send back a quick yes, no. And that works brilliantly when you're at a certain degree of scale. I completely agree that's overkill if you've only got a couple. And I also agree, I think you made a really important point, that it's worth knowing how to do this stuff yourself, because it's impossible for you to say if someone else, whether that's an assistant or a letting agent or whoever, is doing a good job if you don't know what good looks like. However, if I were pitching hard to move this into worth paying for, I would say that you can have assistants in all different forms. So even if you don't own any properties at all, could you get someone off Upwork or a site like that to go through Rightmove listings for you and filter down to the ones that are of interest? Perhaps even call the agents and book in viewings for you. If you're trying to juggle property with a busy full-time job and a busy life, which, let's face it, virtually everyone is, then you'll take time savings wherever you can get them. And there are many, many, many people who listen to this podcast and love the idea of investing in property, but never get round to it because they see the power and the potential of it, but life always gets in the way. And an assistant is a way of making sure that doesn't happen. So I think, Rob, if you broaden the definition like that, I would put it into worth paying for. And I'd put it there because I think it's something that more people should consider than currently do. But ultimately, yeah, it does depend. So I'm not going to upset if that's where we leave it.
All right, then, let's throw one into the mix that may surprise people. And I'm going to suggest that deal sourcing or deal sourcers go in the depends category. And the reason that may surprise people is because hopefully people are aware we run a company called Property Hub Invest. And one of the things that Property Hub Invest does, not the only thing, is help source deals for people who want to build a portfolio. So by putting it in a depends category, are we shooting ourselves in the foot? No, I don't think so, Rob. because one, I think we'd lose a lot of credibility telling everyone they have to use a property sourcer when clearly you don't. And the cases where it makes no sense to me is if you're investing in your immediate area, you should know that area pretty well, so do it yourself. Or another example being if you are very niche on your strategy, so you only will do Victorian refurbs in Stockport, no sourcer is going to specialise in that because it's far too niche, so you're going to have to do it yourself. And finally, if you are one of those rare human beings that just has excessive time on their hands and you don't have a busy life and you don't have, a full-time job and all those other things, and you want to build a network up and you want to spend the time and effort sourcing a deal, then yeah, do it yourself. They're the exceptions, and that's for me why it depends. If you're a busy professional and you're investing away from your immediate area, then I think it's well worth doing, which you'd expect me to say. And Rob, I'm expecting at least that last part for you to agree on. The first part, you can say whatever you like, but that part, I think busy professionals who are investing should seriously consider it, and those who are investing outside their immediate areas should also consider it. But there's a big group who should just do it themselves.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. You could say that even if you're keeping it local or you've got a really niche strategy, then having relationships with other people in the area who can potentially pass things your way that they've seen that don't fit them, it's just another source of deal flow. So why not? There's no obligation to buy what they show you. So it's just a way of seeing more. But maybe that's stretching the definition of deal sourcing too far. So if we're talking about companies or people who do this professionally, then yeah, completely agree. There's a set of people who I think should be doing it and perhaps more should be doing it. And there's another, probably larger group where it makes more sense to just focus, get your own processes dialed in and do it yourself.
So let's wrap this up then. In the worth paying for camp, we had mortgage brokers, good photos and an accountant. In not worth paying for, we had mentoring/courses. We also sort of put insurance there. Obviously, you need the base insurance, which you have to have, but the rest is purely optional. So if you have a cash pot, then that's probably enough. So we'll put insurance, I think, just in not worth paying for. And in depends, we've got surveys, deal sourcing, an assistant, and credit checks. You happy with that, Rob?
Yeah, happy enough. I think you could argue a couple of these, but that's the fun of it, isn't it? Everyone's going to have a different view. Those are our opinions. It doesn't mean it's right for everyone, but maybe if you're listening, it's given you a different viewpoint on a couple of these things where maybe before you just taken it for granted or you just accepted the received wisdom. But ultimately, all of these are something that every investor is going to have to decide on for themselves.
It's time for Hub Extra now, the part of the show where we give you more, and we are really giving you more this week. I absolutely loved this YouTube video by Patrick Boyle. I think we've recommended his YouTube channel before. He's very, very good and covers the type of topics that we're interested in, and because you're geeks by listening to this type of stuff, you're going to love it as well. It's well researched, but it's funny as well. It's really, really good. But one of his recent videos had me howling. It really, really had me chuckling out loud. And it's called Neon the Line. If that sounds familiar, that's the huge mega project that's apparently been started in Saudi Arabia. And it's a city that's being built that is just in one long line in the middle of the desert. It's proposed to be a £500 billion project. If you know nothing about this scheme, then go and check the video out. But also, if you know about the scheme, go and check the video out because it is hilarious. The way he picks it apart bit by bit is just genius. It's educational and hilarious at the same time. Rob, something we've aspired to for 10 years and haven't quite reached, but Patrick has nailed it in this video.
I know it's quite annoying, but he's brilliant. When he gets upset about something, he doesn't like something, he's very, very funny. So definitely go check out the link in the show notes to that one because he is brilliant. Just before we finish, thought it'd be nice in the podcast to start giving shout outs to people who'd got in touch in one way or the other. So I wanted to give a shout out this week to Paul, who's a long time listener of the show. He came to one of our events years and years ago. And he got in touch the other day to say, after 13 years of being a landlord, my first and probably last Section 21 should come to fruition on Tuesday after a 14-month wait to go through the process and get a bailiff. Of course, Manchester Council told my tenant to stay until the bailiff arrives. Oh, and the appointment is 3 hours before I fly away on holiday. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Paul, I can't believe it. 14-month wait. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I very much hope that you're now relaxing on holiday and everything went well. So that sounds like a situation that was not a happy one for Paul. And next week, we're going to share some of our pain as well. We're sharing some of the things that have gone horribly wrong in our own portfolios over the past year. So thank you for listening. Join us next Thursday for that one. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.